Welcome. Today we're going to discuss the technique Detour from Doom and some of the more important principles, concepts, rules, theories, and strategies of the technique. So let's start out with the strategy like we normally do. The strategy is pretty simple. We're going to be evading while using purposeful aggression to counter the opponent. But as simple as that sounds, it actually gets a little bit more complex. So let's get into it. If you notice, this technique starts from a ready position, which means we don't have to worry about rule number one because we've already established our base. What is the benefit of that? Well, that we can go straight into our strategy and start doing the evasion. But before we get into that, let's talk about a fundamental principle of American Kenpo, economy of motion, which means to eliminate all wasted moves. So another way to think about that is timing, because timing is everything, and removing all the end-ends. So what we don't want to do is evade, then block, and then counter, but rather using the same timing, doing it all simultaneously. So let's get into each of those pieces and talk about how they're actually done. So if we look at the evasion piece, we're basically doing a foot maneuver, in this case, a drag step. The interesting thing to keep in mind is that drag steps are typically done on the same line that we're in. But we're also going to be using the concept of the circle. And then combining the two is going to give us an entry in a diversified angle of entry. So that's another fancy way of saying we're going to come in at a different angle. So the idea here is as they would come in, we're going to be changing the line. So we're no longer just using one line, but rather multiple lines. So why is that important? Well, there's three reasons. Number one, our strategy, evasion. I'm getting off the line of attack. Number two, exposing their center line. So if you notice, we now have all their vital targets available to us. Number three is we're attacking their minimal depth zone. And what that means is that we're attacking the weakest part of their stance. So now that we talked about the evasion piece, let's talk about our defensive maneuver. In this case, the left downward block. The interesting thing to keep in mind is that even though we are doing a left downward block, we are not blocking. The idea is to do a cover or a check depending on the situation. So what do I mean by that? While we evade, we're going to be obeying the principle of the outer rim, which it's an oval shape from eyebrow to groin that gets us our height, shoulder to shoulder gets us the width, and then shoulder to shoulder gets us the depth. That's the zone that we have to worry or keep our arms within. So I don't want to start going outside of that zone to try to block the kick because we've already went up the circle and evaded it. But rather, what I want to do is to start covering up zones. Now keep in mind that the ideal face does the low block because we understand the rule of not kicking a standing man above the waist. However, I can't take into assumption that this individual knows that rule or that he's not flexible enough to try to kick me in the head. So rather than committing to this downward block, I need to do what's called reading. I'm going to read the situation, and based on where he kicks, I might have to cover up the high zone or the low zone. So the idea is to keep my check until I've read the situation and then effectively deliver one or the other. Remember, just because it's written in the book one way doesn't mean it's got to be the way that you execute it. So now, let's talk about the final maneuver, the punch. If you notice my punch, it's at its farthest reaching distance. By doing that foot maneuver, we can get closer to the opponent. Now, by going up the circle, if you notice my shoulder is right now pointing to the right front flank, we're now going to be pointing to the left front flank. So the idea is to get closer to the opponent while we're delivering the maneuver. Remember, we're going to use purposeful aggression. So we're trying to eliminate the defense and go straight into our offense. So let's execute the first maneuver so you see what that would look like. Good. So now notice what happened. We hit our opponent and they started flying back because we took advantage of their minimal depth zone. And then I was supposed to kick him, but he wasn't there. We had that indent and it took too long. Eliminate the indents. You want to do this as a continuity of motion. What that means is we're doing that step drag, or that drag step rather. Remember that a kick is just an exaggerated step. So the same way we did that right now with the drag and the step, we want to do that with the kick. So if we execute it, this is what it would look like. So now, let's talk about the kick. The kick is not a typical front kick where we're hitting with the ball of the foot, but rather a lifting instep kick, which means we're hitting somewhere between our shin and the top of the foot, taking advantage of this open-ended triangle, and then taking advantage of their open-ended triangle so that we can create more margin for error. But what it also does is gauging. We're using the foot as a backing so that he can't go away, and we keep him at the gauge that we want so that we can continue the technique. So now let's talk about the follow-up maneuvers. The punches. We're going to be combining power principles. Again, I don't want to send him flying. If you did, then just hit him straight on, and then you can leave. But the idea of the technique is to keep him in place, so we're going to be combining power principles. So instead of just using backup mass, we're also going to be using gravitational marriage. So I want to hit down at the 45 and settle. This is called settling. I'm dropping my weight so that I can enhance the strike. Then we do the same thing using torque and gravitational marriage rather than backup mass as we deliver the back knuckle. And this is using counter-rotational torque, and again, using your body English to settle and deliver the strike. But notice what happened. My opponent started to bend forward. This is a reactionary positioning. We know this is going to happen, so what do? Well, we do the strategy of the technique. Evade, get to our new line, and then take advantage of them with offense. But what happens if, again, I hit this guy and he doesn't have that reactionary positioning? Well, this is where the formulation equation comes in. And remember, to simplify that, we can basically add, change, or delete. In this case, we would just change. Continue doing something in the front. Or continue to leave and delete. But sticking to the ideal phase, let's continue where if they do bend, we evade, we get this chop to control them, and then we get our hand up and ready to strike. The interesting thing to keep in mind here is the outer rim principle again. Just like we did it for defense, we need to do it for offense. I don't want to go outside of the outer rim, and I don't want to lose line of sight. The idea is to stay within my outer rim and keep line of sight of what I'm going to be striking. So this brings in the next concept of fitting. If you notice, right now their neck is a concave, so it's a circular shape. The idea is that we're still going to use this open-ended triangle to hit that, but in this case, it's called fitting. So that's where we're going to be striking. And then, again, because we're using gravitational marriage and we want to settle, we want to make sure that we have the proper alignments. Alignments make backup mass possible, and gravitational marriage is backup mass done on a vertical. So make sure that your elbow is in line with what you're doing, and then you would settle and drop into the strike. And this brings us into the final concept where we're left in the middle of a fight. This is up to you to decide, again, reading the situation, whether you need to continue striking or you can leave and cover out. So now that we've talked about the rules, concepts, principles, theories, and strategies of the technique, let's demonstrate it one time fairly slow so you can see what it would look like in application. Up. We hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system a little bit better. Thank you very much.